Dominic's ready? Good.
Thank you. Good evening and welcome to our special meeting this evening. I'd like to call this meeting to order, noting that the board members are all here except Judy is out of town and maybe that's Jack at the door right now. We are expecting Jack. I need approval of the agenda.
So moved. Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We do have one public comment this evening, and we will do that now. Rebecca Road. So the process, Rebecca, is
You can come right up front.
you can come up in the front here. We have a microphone, so you're heard.
Right there?
No,
you
you can
just
just have a seat.
Just sit down at the table. Yep. That'll work. Awesome.
Yeah, that's great.
Perfect.
So the process is you get 3 minutes, we do time. So if you try to hold your comments to 3 minutes, Ted will time and give you kind of a wave at 30 seconds before you need to complete to kind of wrap up.
This will take about 2 seconds.
Okay, so welcome, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Rebecca Rose, I'm a compliment and thank you guys all for your service and I do the job. I did want to say that I'm hoping for a little more information about the survey of the new school, where it's going, and I felt like there was the survey that maybe didn't give as many options as maybe I was hoping for, and I'm hoping that this meeting isn't like where you guys like decide all this stuff or what's the process, so
Right.
that's it. Thank you.
All right,
Super.
thank you,
Thanks.
Rebecca. So the evening starts with just administrative report. I'm just going to turn it over to Randy. He'd like to kind of set the stage before we head into that survey.
Yeah, actually, Rebecca's comments, I think, are a good segue into really what I wanted to talk about, which is really what's our next 3 months look like? And they're going to go quickly, because one of the things that the board has done is we have our regular board meeting each month, and we've now also scheduled an additional board meeting, which this is the first of a series of them, over the course of the summer. And I think to what your question was, Rebecca, was what decisions are we making? We're certainly making kind of directional decisions, but there are no decisions that this body will make with regards to what goes on our ballot until August. So we have a lot of things that have to kind of fall in place, that we have decision-making points throughout the summer. Tonight starts to just kind of give us that direction. So what I wanted to do is just kind of set the stage of what we're doing tonight and a little bit of what we're not doing tonight, just so we can kind of stay within our wheelhouse of our work. The first thing is, Bill Foster's here. I'm going to turn it over to him in just a few minutes. Bill works with School Perceptions, and he has worked exclusively with us on this survey. His company is one that does many of these across the state, and his niche is really in the referendum area. So that'll be a piece that I'll let him introduce and talk about that, but that's really a big primary driver of us tonight. We put out the survey with the intent to give us some direction so that we kind of at least knew where some of the preferences are on some of the big items that would be falling within a referendum question. But certainly those decisions fall with the board, and they're going to be pieces that we're going to start extrapolating out some of the bigger pieces of those so that we can start our planning going forward and then bring to you at subsequent meetings the continued granularity of some of those pieces so that we can get to hopefully the August 8th board meeting and approve our resolutions, which will be kind of the final decision point as far as what goes to referendum. But just to walk through it and to hand it out to the board, just a very quick kind of outline sheet. We're here on May 23rd. We're going to look at the community survey and talk a little bit about project timelines, and also kind of looking at what are the timelines that we're looking at throughout the next 3 months. We have our regular board meeting on June 13th, where one of the things we'd like to discuss with you, and we'll give a little bit of a preamble to that tonight, is a reimbursement resolution for Heritage Elementary in order to meet some of our timelines. We have a June 27th meeting, and this is one that's going to be a really large meeting. It's where we start to talk about the deeper dive into our budgets. Jay from Vogel's been doing a lot of work with trying to get our costing pieces down. We're working on our programs with EUA as far as what's our square footage program per school. We're going to be talking about some of the other remodeling projects, the exceeding the cap question, and then facility maintenance. And it's really going to start to come together where you'll see all of those pieces converging on the 27th so we can show you what are the projects, what's the cost impact, and we can kind of then see kind of how those fit together. There were some questions that I received from a community member today just about like enrollment projections. So we'll be able to show kind of what size of a building, what's our square footage impact, what does that look like when we start to move forward timing-wise with our enrollment. So those questions will be coming on the 27th. We have some room on July 11th, which is our regular board meeting. We'll determine really what needs to happen between the 27th and July 25th, because that's where we'll start to put together our draft resolutions. So really depending and informing us on the June 27th meeting, may bring things forward to the July 11th meeting that we need to further extrapolate. And then we start to look at really putting together our resolutions towards the end of July, really moving us forward then to the beginning of August. One of the things that Steve and I have really talked about is trying to keep these things chunked out enough that it doesn't overwhelm the board. So I mean, we don't want to be bringing you a survey, an option, a cost, and trying to put all of those together in an hour-and-a-half meeting. That's just too much. So part of what we're focusing on here tonight is looking at the survey results, how does that inform some of our decisions moving forward. We're also going to spend a little bit of time based on what we've taken as and gleaned as some of the information out of the survey, and we've started to do the next steps. So you're going to see a bit of that. If there's something that we're starting to go down a road that's a bit ahead of you that you're not comfortable with, you have to let us know. I mean, that's kind of one of our, I guess, the ground rules we need right now is that if there's something that's you're feeling like you saw something or heard something different in the survey than we were extrapolating out, please let us know that, because that's impacting already kind of our planning moving into some of these additional meetings. But otherwise, I think really what our goal is to, over the next 3 months, to really bring things to the board to help you understand all of the pieces that are going into it, using this survey as a guide to what are the pieces that we need to have as part of it. Steve's working on some of the financial aspects of it. You saw some of those early projections from PMA on costing perspectives. I know Steve and Allie worked with Eric Cass at our last meeting, or over in the last week, and that's going to come forward at our meeting on the 27th. We may actually start off with Eric talking about some of the financial pieces before we actually get into kind of what those budgets look like within the actual scope of our work. So that's kind of what the next 3 months looks like. It's going to be kind of a progression, but it's going to move pretty quickly. And our end goal is by August 8th to have our referendum resolutions. If by any chance we need more time, we have another meeting scheduled on August 22nd as a backup, and that still meets our statutory timelines for the fall referendum. So that just kind of gives you a little bit of a thought as far as what we're actually going to be working on. And tonight is really our first place to step into that. So with that, let's jump into the survey, and I think Bill can probably answer some of the questions, Rebecca, that you asked during your public comments, because Bill is the person who works very exclusively with these surveys and can help us. So you can speak right from there, and the mics will pick you up, Bill.
All right.
But I'll let you also do a little bit more introduction of yourself, and then move ahead with your presentation.
Well, great. Again, I'm Bill Foster with School Perceptions. Actually, I've been here before, but I think it was about 7 years ago.
Yeah.
So I'm back again, just more gray hair now. I'm the president of School Perceptions. My job is to take you through the community survey tonight to tell you what the survey said and try to make sense of the data. So we can begin. I don't know who the clicker is.
I've got it. You got it, or you want me to do it?
So again, School Perceptions, we're actually a Wisconsin-based company. We've been around for over 20 years. We do work throughout the country, but as a Wisconsin-based firm, most of our work is in kind of the Midwest. We've done well over 10,000 surveys for staff, student, parent engagement, and we're up over 850 projects like yours for the sake of referendum planning. So we've done this before. Your report is organized really in 4 areas. First of all, everything that was in the survey itself is in the report. So a month from now, when you're scratching your head and saying, what did that survey actually say? Well, it's in the report. We're going to look at demographic information. We're going to analyze the data, break it out, and then we've got time at the end for questions and answers. So people could take the survey. It was mailed to every household. People could take it online, or they could take it via paper. It was administered in April, and we had 2,541 responses. 348 came back by paper, which gave us a participation rate of 29%, which raises the question, is that good? The answer is apparently your community are overachievers. It's very good. Our average was running about 20% during the pandemic. We actually went up to 22%. People were so bored they wanted to take surveys, apparently. Now we've dropped down a little bit and are averaging below 20%, but you're up at 29%. So way to go. From a statistical standpoint, though, you've got a margin of error plus or minus just under 2%. If we were to get another 1,000 people to take it, it might drop down to 1.8%. So it just locks in. In fact, you know, we say when you hit about 400, it kind of locks in. So we're up at 2,500. So you've got really good data. We're going to look at the demographics. Age, you tend towards kind of the middle. You have a high parent response rate. When I look at this, I always want to make sure our seniors are well represented, which they are in your data. In which municipality do you reside? We had almost 3/4 for the village of Waunakee, and then we had representation from all the other townships and a few of the cities that just touched the district. And I think we checked and said this does look pretty representative of the district. We had 92% of our sample that said they live in the district and 8% no. The 3% is they weren't sure where they live, which raises the question, who are these people taking our survey that don't live in our district? It's really primarily two areas. One is staff, so all staff were asked to participate even if they don't live in the district. And then it's the possibility is that also parents were asked, and if parents choose to open enroll into the district, they can't vote, so that 8% will not be included in the funding support question. So they, you know, it's not that we don't care what they say, but they can't vote on the funding support. We did ask some other questions that we might want to factor in their data, but we wanted them to be involved, but we can't count their votes when it comes to funding. So 16% of our sample were employees and 64% were parents. So we're going to break this into subgroups in just a moment. I'll explain how that works to remove any bias. So again, everything that was in the survey was in the report. So this is the background information that begins to explain that there are two different sources of funding that the districts use. One is the operational referendum, and then there's the capital. And your project potentially includes both funding sources. So there, in concept, could be two questions on the ballot come November. And then again, the background information, the capital referendum's used to issue a bond to pay for major facility projects. We shared kind of the board strategy, the district strategy of maintaining a current mill rate over the last 4 years. We explained that we've been working on a master plan to guide this process. And this is, again, I think I was involved in phase 1, which was completed in 2016. And now you're up to phase 2. And you have some challenges, the first being enrollment, and you went through a study by Roffers that show that you're growing. You're going to be out of capacity shortly, or are out of capacity, or I guess next year you will be in middle school. And you've got, like most districts, critical maintenance needs. These are major systems that are very expensive to maintain, and they're beginning to age out. And then the fourth challenge is Heritage Elementary, which is your oldest school. So again, this information, you know this better than I was in the survey. And really, when we looked at your project, there was kind of a turn left, turn right decision. And it came down to the middle school location, and it was almost like a pathway. If you were to go at one location, everything would follow, and if you went down a different road, everything else, the decisions would change. So we explained pathway 1 would be to build a new middle school on the Heritage Elementary site. We explained how that would work and the corresponding costs. Or pathway 2 was to build a new middle school on the outer edge of Waunakee. That's also a possibility. Again, how it would work and what the corresponding costs would be. We then asked the question, what advice would you give in terms of the best location to build a new middle school? Now, when you look at our total sample, we're overweighted with staff, we're overweighted with parents, and we're underweighted with what I call the purple people, the non-parent, non-staff group. And in my mind, those folks are the most important because they literally represent about 3/4 of your community. 3/4 of your community don't work in the district nor have kids in the district. But so I don't want to look at all data. I want to break it into 3 subgroups. So the first one is the staff. Staff is in gray, and they're really important because they're here every day. They probably arguably know maybe better than anybody else, but they represent less than 1% of the community. But 58% of our staff said we should build on the heritage site, with another 22% saying I would prefer or I would support either. The next group are our parents. They're in blue, and you know, by definition they've got kids in the district. And again, they're leaning towards the build on heritage site, with another 22% supporting either, so you're up over 70% of that group. And our purple people are non-parent, non-staff. A majority of those folks are supporting the heritage site. It's always nice when you do a survey and get conclusive data. Sometimes we do a survey and it's split. In this case, we've got pretty clear direction on the best location. This next section, we didn't know where it was going to go, so it doesn't necessarily, not all this applies as well. But if the community supports building a middle school on the outer edge of town, which we have since learned that they're not as excited about, or pathway 2, what advice would you give regarding whether to remodel or replace heritage? So you can't, so this was kind of going down pathway 2, but if you were to go down that path, you know, then it's, people were clearly saying rebuild, replace Heritage Elementary. So that's kind of a caveat on that data. If the community supports rebuilding or replacing the Heritage School, there are 3 potential options. Again, now if you're going to be putting a middle school there, some of these go away, but build a new Heritage Elementary on the current site, build a new Heritage Elementary School next to the intermediate school, or at the South Woodland site. So again, kind of reminding this is pathway 2. We've got Randy's computer in the way. Thank you, Randy.
Sorry.
So we got building at the current heritage site, probably arguably the winner, and then it kind of drops down. Next was build on next to the intermediate school site, and then it drops down to the South Woodland site, arguably was the 3rd priority given the 3 that we tested. So again, you had both the potential capital referendum as well as operational referendum. An operational referendum allows the district to exceed the state revenue limit. And we tested 3 potential areas where we could spend that money, first being staff salaries. And would you support an operational referendum to increase staff salaries? Here we have very conclusive data with all, of course, staff thinks that's a great idea, which doesn't surprise me. And 83% of our parents, but even our non-parent, non-staff, a strong majority of those folks are saying, yep, we think a great teacher in a classroom makes all the difference. We're willing to pay them well. And we get to operating new space. If we go build a new school, we're going to have to heat, clean, and operate that new space. So we're going to need some money to do that. Would you support a referendum to operate the new spaces? Again, majority of all 3 subgroups said yes to that. And the 3rd component was to maintain current programs and services. All districts are in kind of a strange situation where you've got some changing funding sources with ESSER and whatnot, and it's becoming increasingly difficult to maintain current programs and services. But again, here all 3 groups, to a little lesser degree, are supporting an operational referendum to maintain current programs and services. So then we get to the funding support question, and we're not testing the plan. We don't know exactly what the plan is yet, but we believe the plan will include both an operating and capital component. And we proposed in the survey that if we were able to come up with a plan that would maintain the current mill rate, to fund both the operating and capital, and we're not sure exactly how that's going to work because we need to get some data back in order to do that, Would you be supportive of such a plan? And staff residents, 93% said yes, with only 3% saying no. The parents were at 87%, with only 4% saying no. And our most important group that represent the majority of the Waunakee voters, the non-parent, non-staff there, it's 79%. Full disclosure, we've never quite done a survey like this before. Usually we've got a definite plan with a definite tax impact, and in this case, we kind of did it a little bit backwards. So we said, we're not sure, we've got to reverse engineer a plan to come up with it to try to, if we could maintain that, would you support it? And what we heard was a resounding yes. So now it's up to the board to determine exactly how to do that. But so that was the concept. So we tested the concept and there was strong support. So what did we learn by doing this survey? We learned that a majority of all subgroups do support building a new middle school at the heritage site. So I think that was an important decision. And a majority of all subgroups support pursuing operation for the staff salaries, the new space, and maintaining current programs and services. And a majority of all subgroups support pursuing both an operational and capital reference if the plan would keep the property tax mill rate at the current level of 1089. So now we've got a framework on which to spend the next couple months figuring out how is all that going to come together, and can we do it? Can we bring those pieces together? So I think that is the report. Questions?
Thank you, Bill. Any questions for Bill?
What's the logic in including all teachers, even if they didn't live in the district?
Yeah, good question. So the logic, first of all, is teachers are in the buildings every day and they're talking to parents every day. So if you don't ask them, a parent asks a question, they'll say, so what's the district doing? They'll say, I don't know. They never asked me and I don't live here. Well, no, we want to know. And I think parents or staff, probably to a larger extent than almost any other group, influences what other people are thinking. So if you don't know, if the staff isn't on board with what you're proposing, you're dead in the water. So that's why we asked them, even the non-resident staff, but the non-resident staff are not included in that, the last set of data that we just went through. Good questions?
Rebecca, can I have you go back to the last one slide back? Or maybe Bill can do that, I'm sorry. There you go. So just kind of as a prompt of discussion, and this was the kind of the high-level takeaways that Bill brought forward, and it's really the takeaways that we've started to kind of internalize as we look at our next steps. Are there things within the survey results that, as you see them here, that cause you to question any of those type of things? Or, because I think you put it together as kind of, this is a framework for some of our work going forward. Yes, I just want to affirm that the board saw similar type of things. And obviously this is a piece that I'm asking you kind of a question after you've seen kind of the breadth of the survey results here just for a short time. They were in board book. But is anybody seeing anything different from what we're seeing from like the community pieces other than what Bill's extrapolated out here, and really I think the conversations that Steve and I and our core team have been having over the last couple of weeks? Any other questions? Jack, I thought you were going to say something, I'm sorry.
No, I think, some of the things that I've heard, since this survey's out and came back is, some of the people were confused. Why they're confused, I don't know. But it's, some feedback. And, obviously, one of the concerns that, I've heard from the community is, again, and we've talked about it at length, moving Heritage, to the other side of Century, you know, are we gonna increase our busing and, you know, other operational costs, you know,
Sure.
because now you've got, a lot of kids in that area that are walking,
Right.
to school. So those are, you know, some comments that I've
Sure.
heard is, you know, in the, community.
No, and that's a great point, Jack. I mean, that's a piece that we'll have Steve bring up at one of our subsequent meetings. But we did look into the busing and walkability. I mean, one of the things I think is a bit of a misperception is that where current heritage site is primarily all walkers, there's a lot of kids bused there. And so one of the things that Steve took a look at was if you flip it and you put heritage out next to the intermediate school, how does that change our ratio of busing and walkers? And I believe it just by small margin actually creates more walkers on the other side of Century Avenue. But it's basically a similar piece. You just kind of flip it as far as kind of who are your walkers and who are your riders. So that's part of the things we can bring that data piece back. So if there's other things like that that you'd like to see as we bring subsequent information forward, we'll be happy to do that.
Well, a question regarding a school on the outer edge. If I'm living in the Bishops Bay area, I'm not gonna want it north. You know, or it depends on where you're coming from. We
Correct.
didn't say what
No.
side of town it would be on, and I think any side of town would put the other side, wherever they're coming from.
That's right.
So, I think that's, you know, it makes sense for the middle school. A lot of our middle schools go to high school for a math class or something like that too, so it makes sense to have them close.
Right.
Us at, you know, co-curriculars as well. They share a lot of things. No, that's what I've heard.
Anything else anybody saw survey-wise that, anything different than what you're extrapolating out here? Kind of beating that horse, but it's a really important piece for us as we
It
do our
is.
planning.
The really nice thing, again, is that it was clear data. It's
Right.
hard to come in and say, your community's split, you know, and they're split. And then it's hard as a board to make a decision, but it's nice when you get pretty clear data to then, and it's really a planning survey. It provides that framework, and now you can take the next step. So I thought it was pretty straightforward in terms of easy to interpret.
Agreed.
Yeah, there's just no questions, because I think what this data was telling us over the last year, 2
Right.
years,
Right.
is what the data is telling us, what the community's telling us, so there's really nothing to ask.
Okay? Good. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Bill.
Awesome. Thank you, Bill. Appreciate you being here. All right.
Are you just gonna continue,
Yep,
Randy?
we can continue on. I mean, I see Chris just walked in. Are you our main presenter here, Chris, or is Robin or others partially with you too?
Robin was supposed to be here tonight. I think we both had the calendars at 7.
Oh, all right.
We'll try to do this stuff.
All right, well, if you want to give me a few minutes, I could do one other agenda item before you guys. Yeah, I know you just walked in the door.
Maybe if you could
It's
put
going to be a fast one, but I will do it and buy you at least a minute's breather here.
see if I can-
Yeah, but what our next agenda item is really our team from EUA talking about a few of our next steps. But while Chris is just kind of catching his breath here for a second, I did add another agenda on our agenda tonight, and that's just, we had a couple student trips. One of them was just inadvertently not added to our last board meeting, and the other one came in, and we'd like to have it, action on it as far as a student who's been approved for the FFCLA through competition. So I'm looking for board consideration of a travel abroad trip to Spain, the planning process in 2023. So they wouldn't go until 2023 timeframe, but they have a two-step process when they bring these to the board. The first one allows them to start planning and getting things in line, and then the second one is their final itinerary, how many kids have actually signed on, then we give final approval later on in the year. And then the other one, by policy, we do allow families or students to travel outside the state, particularly when they qualify per a federal or per a national event. And we have a student in our family consumer ed area, and Jillian Anderson, the teacher, would be accompanying them. So asking for your consideration of those two items this evening.
What is our chaperone policy for out of the country? And, I mean, I'm assuming we don't do a one-on-one. One student.
No, and it's actually, I believe, written in policy, and there's also a policy that we have along with the trip guidelines from there's usually a travel company we're traveling with who has very specific guidelines as well. So I don't have that off the top of my head right now, Brian, but we do have those within our policy and our procedures, and it's also tied there. So I can make sure that they bring that when they bring their final approval for those. But the one out to California, I think that's almost one-on-one. So, but the one at the Spain trip, it's relatively small ratios. We usually get a few of our staff to go and sometimes a parent or two. Mark?
Yeah, a question I had, for the out-of-country trips.
Yeah.
Is for the kids who can't, I know that they do fundraisers too, so they can
Yeah.
get about X amount.
Yeah.
But then, does our student assistance fund help those who are not economically able to participate? Or how does that work?
Yeah, Steve, you sit on that committee for the Student Financial Assistance Committee. We've assisted with some of these trips for students who can't afford them. Is that accurate?
We've not turned down any
Right.
requests from the committee, even for more expensive items like hockey. We had several hockey requests this year.
Yep.
So typically, a higher request like this would go to the chair of the committee, who's a district social worker, who would look at it. And she would bring it through our committee, but we've not, in the recent couple of years, we've had the funds to approve
Right.
any requests that have come to us, thankfully.
Okay. Thank you.
Do you have an idea of what the balance on that account is?
The balance is over 10,000 still, because we just received some really nice donations in the last couple of months, so the community's really been supportive of what we've been doing, and that's why the committee right now has been focused on looking at some other ideas that we could be doing, because we've had a lot of support, which has been great, so that's why we haven't had to turn down even the more expensive type of requests that we've received, because we've had the funds available.
Any other questions? If
Just
not.
one other, innocent suggestion, and I don't understand, for the FCCLA, could this have come to us sooner? Because I see we missed the early bird fee breakdown, and so was the competition too close to the deadline, or?
I know the Spain one was missed. It wasn't put on it never got to our desk to get put on here, so that one's coming. And they wanted to have that conversation with parents and students before the school year's
Sure.
out. The FCCLA one we just received, and we put it on as soon as we got it. So, yeah, I think that they just competed in that not too long ago, so some of these
Some people
come
weren't
pretty
aware of
quickly,
who-
correct.
okay. All right.
So,
Motion to support?
okay, second, any other questions? All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, say no. Okay, so moving back to the referendum planning.
All right. So, Rebecca, if I can have you pull up their presentation. I know, Chris, you're still waiting for Robin, but,
Yeah, she's probably about 5 to 10 minutes.
all right. Well, let me give a little bit of a preface to what we're doing here tonight. One of the things that we've been doing as a core team, and our core team is members of our administrative team, myself, Steve, Andy Blackburn. We've just incorporated our principals and Tim Schell and Amy Johnson into it. And then we have members of our Vogel and our EUA team. We've been meeting every few weeks. I mean, we've actually been meeting for a number of months to really just start to put together all of the different pieces that we need to bring in front of you and make sure that from a perspective of EUA's perspective that we have the program and the square footage things correct, so we can start to, so that Jay can start to put dollars to them. We're going to be vetting out some things tomorrow. Steve and I are going to be going for a walk through a few of our buildings to make sure that we have some of those remodel projects that we can bring back and make sure that these gentlemen have what they need in order to cost those pieces out. So that when we bring all this information forward to you, which will probably be in the June timeframe, that you can see really what the scope of it is, what the size of it is, what the general cost of it is. And part of what we're starting to look at tonight is just trying to show you what our next steps are and timelines. So with that part of the presentation, I think I can kick it over to you guys, and then when Robin gets here, she can also join us. So I think the clicker is right next to you. There you go. So.
All right, so as Randy said, we're just gonna do a couple next steps. And just first off, apologies for walking in here. So we had our schedules mixed up here. So Robin will be here in a few minutes, but we really apologize for not getting here when we're supposed to. You've met most of us before, but for new faces, my name's Chris Michaud. I'm a design architect with UA. Robin, who's on the way, is a project manager with UA. She's the one managing these projects. And Andy Lyons, who I also believe is on the way, not entirely certain, is our engagement specialist. He works with you to make sure and to assist with you guys in communicating out to your district.
Then Jay Thompson, Vice President of Older Brothers, as Randy mentioned, working with support on the costing side and constructability and schedule and logistics, things that go with that. And then
Eric Bullitt. All right, so let's share with you where we're at currently. I've got the next 3 slides here really have to do with the 2 main focus points. That being a new elementary school and a new middle school. So let's start with the elementary first here. What you're seeing here is just a test fit for a new elementary school that could be located on the intermediate school site. So you can see we positioned the building, we've had circulation drafted up around it. There's a couple things to take in mind with this. And I know some questions probably Jay can relate to more. A lot of this is based on construction and timing. In order for us to look at that date up there, 2024 to have it open, we would need to start the design process earlier than the referendum. So that's what you're seeing up here is an early design start. We'd be doing an entire phase of the design. For those of you that are unfamiliar with the different phases of design, there's schematic design, which is essentially, I'd say it's about, when you think of a design project as being 9 months, schematic design is the first 3 months, design development is the second 3 months, and construction documents is the last 3 months. Doesn't always equate to 3, 3, and 3, but just for sake of conversation. What we're anticipating is that we would complete that entire schematic design phase prior to the November referendum. And that would obviously require a reimbursement resolution, which needs to be talked. With regards to the middle school, you're probably familiar with this image or one which looked exactly or very similar to this one. This is the middle. This is a test fit of the middle school on the existing Heritage Elementary School site. And essentially, what we've done is we've looked at 2 potential scenarios here. And the major difference in these scenarios, as we point out, is that this one up on the screen here, would be ready for the school year of 2026. And the reason for that is that we need to build an elementary school first in order to transition the students out of the existing Heritage in order to begin demolition and construction of this, if the building is located on the site the way it is. And there's certain advantages and disadvantages to doing the building in this particular A couple of the pros is that if you do this, you're waiting until the existing heritage building is vacated before you do construction, so you don't have construction coinciding with a school that's in operation at the same time. It can be done. We all kind of understand what that might be, you know, because of noise disruption, limited site. This particular option here, because of, oops, sorry, push the wrong button. So here, I thought that was a laser pointer. No laser. Because of the way in which we're suggesting the building gets positioned here, it allows for larger expanses of property to be available on the site, which allows us to do a full-size football, soccer playing field on the site, in addition to maintaining the 300-meter track.
Not sure it's gonna work, but there's a laser pointer.
Yes, it does.
Appreciate that.
Boy Scout.
Okay. All right, so what you're seeing here is the amount of space that you would need to have in order to fit essentially a full-size playing field on the site. This option here, because we can kind of stretch and elongate this out in this area, we're anticipating that it's a two-story building. Maybe there's a portion of this that would go up into 3 stories. But there's probably enough available space on the site in this particular location to get everything in 2 stories.
How many students are you planning on in this building?
This is, the capacity for this is about 1,000.
So that's one of the things I think is important to kind of outline, is when we were looking at this 2 years ago, right, about in 2019, early 2020, we were talking about a 2-phase build to the middle school, where we were gonna build a smaller capacity that then would be expandable up to a higher number. What we've decided as we've gone through this process with the middle school staff and administration and looking at our enrollment projections, and given the timelines of when this would come online, we felt it was better to move right away to the full school as opposed to one that had multiple building phases. So you're seeing a larger school in this phase than what you would have seen 2 years ago when we were starting to look at this initially.
Is this expandable? You know, can you add on or?
Yeah, so in this particular scheme, well, and I would just like to preface, this is a high-level concept block. You know, nothing has been laid out or developed in it. But we are reserving some space at the north end up here. We do have some wiggle room in these areas here that we can begin to push and pull, and as we begin to design, I think it's always been the intent that even with this initial build, we're designing a building that could have a future expansion. So that's what we're planning for. And I can talk about both these, but I'm gonna go to the second one just so you can see sort of the difference between the two, and then if you have any questions, we can go. So the second option, you notice right up at the top, looking at opening it in 2025. So that's 1 year earlier than the previous option. However, there's a couple caveats with that. One is we need to begin construction on the building while the existing Heritage Elementary School is in session. Which means that we would probably be taking the back portion of the site in this general area here offline during that construction, in order to begin constructing. We haven't, mapped out exactly what that looks like, but the likelihood is that portions of this site, including some of those outdoor play areas, would need to transition to different areas on the site, because we would need those for construction. As you can see here, the building, because we're fitting the building and trying to fit the associated areas that go along with it into the site, that there's some consolations with that. And with this, we can't necessarily position the building while an existing building is here and leave enough space on the site to fit in a full-size football field. What you're seeing up here, that's roughly about 80 yards with the same width, same width as a football field. So you don't get a full-size field on that site. The other thing you're seeing here is that, you know, we're getting pretty close to the perimeters of the site in certain areas here. Are there different ways that this could be planned or built? Maybe, you know, we could continue looking at that, but for the most part, we're anticipating that more of this building will need to be 3 stories. You know, now, we're not talking about stacking things on top of gyms and things like that, but the classrooms being stacked up on top of a first floor or something is probably pretty realistic to think of. If you want to see what a 3-story building, there's a couple in the area, middle schools, high schools, where you can sort of understand what that looks like. There's nothing wrong with 3 stories, but with 3 stories come usually a little bit additional cost because you're longer elevators, different types of ratings as you go 3 stories and so forth. Also, you can see on this site, you know, as you begin to fill it up, the area that we want to fill up, this is the low part of the site. This is where all your water is going to want to go, so we're going to need to think a little bit more inventively about how we handle stormwater on this site. That might also be a little bit more cost intensive if we need to go below grade to store water, or things of that nature. I'll talk through just a little bit in terms of some of the overall differences. Obviously in the first one, sorry, wrong direction. In the first one here, the building is in roughly the same position as your existing building here. We've set it back off the street, so you can assume right now you've got a 2-story building for a portion of that. It's roughly similar to that. For traffic, we're looking at the main parking contingent being here, maybe some supplemental parking up here. We're looking at a double queue lane to try to fit as many cars onto the site here as possible. And then a pickup line here. There's also an option to split that and maybe do 2 pickup conditions here and here. And that would allow maybe a faster expediting of picking up students. And those cars here could exit out the top of the site. Buses would be separated from that, coming in this direction and queuing up on this area here, and then they can turn around and loop back on the site. When you look at the second option, we're anticipating that in order to get as many cars as we can on the site, beginning an entry for pickup up here, doing a double queue line, and then doing a loop around and back out that way. And then we would keep buses separated from that along the south. These are just 2 conceptual ideas about how we could solve it in either instance.
One of the things that came up on the intermediate school with busing is where they turn, the swing of the back end of the bus comes into the sidewalk, and making sure that we have enough room so we're not picking off students as the bus turns around.
That's a great point.
And that was an issue. So I think we've got to keep that in mind as we do this.
And I've also heard from, I think, Chris first and then Tim, the initial width of the sidewalk over there needed to really be almost doubled.
Right.
Because as kids are queuing onto a bus, the other kids have to get around them, forcing them to walk on the ground. So we're trying to take all those distances in when we're kind of planning these sites to put some tolerances into it. But yeah, thank you for that comment. And then,
Chris, since we're talking about that,
Sure.
for this design, I was surprised by the amount of car traffic and backup that created at the intermediate site. And so, if we're placing the Heritage, you know, next to it, is there I know you have a plan for the traffic, but it seemed to me with the traffic we have, it probably needed to be a wider drive to begin with, and then I don't think anyone anticipated that amount of flow
At the intermediate.
at the intermediate. So how are we gonna absorb the same amount of traffic? I know their schedules are different.
Yeah, but you're still gonna have parents queuing up for one school long advance of the bell schedule of the other probably. It's 15 minutes or 20 minutes per schedule. And, you know, as we would get into that, I would recommend that we begin to do some traffic studies of increased amount of traffic on that site, what you're anticipating, or similar to what you're receiving now at Heritage Year, that entire contingent's gonna go over. And then look at strategies and look to see if there need to be any revisions in the way in which cars are picked up and dropped off. There's a little bit of latitude that can happen just with the intermediate school as it is, but those types of things occur as a trail. You know, currently, cars come into that site and they go past the front of the building. If you needed to get more cars onto the site, you could do pickup at the rear of the building, but that takes your playground, you know, at the end of the day. So there's things like that that could be investigated, and there could be ways in which we do the pickup and drop off for the elementary school to try to get that traffic entering the site in a different fashion. It's still not 100% solved at this point, but I would anticipate we're doing some studies like that, and the city's probably gonna want us to do some updated traffic analysis.
When you look at that intermediate school right now, all the land around it is plotted off. Are the houses, have you looked at, are the houses?
I haven't
they're-
seen any housing plot or conditions for it.
I didn't know if they were planning a road or if the houses were right.
Around the intermediate school, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah,
I
around
haven't
that
seen
side.
any plots for the ones that are pushed out as far as the intermediate. I know that they're starting some of the development, starting off of Q and Century Avenue that are going towards the intermediate school, but I haven't seen it plotted all the way to the intermediate school, at least I haven't seen that part.
The good thing is that with the program,
And behind the intermediate school, Jack, we also have Dorn Creek that runs back through there. So there is a lowland and a wetland back there that would also have to be navigated.
you've got some low areas here that we have to address, but depending on what type of development occurs there, you know, your closest connection points are probably back in this area here. If there's a future development that has some needs or something like that. We haven't
I'm
seen
just
it.
saying though, if there is a future development, then, you know, could we work with the village to put like a road, you know, close to our property so that it pulls some of that traffic off of Woodland, you know?
Sure. I think what you're saying is when the development gets out into here, that part is there something we can do? Yeah. It's a good question for us to ask to see what the timeline is for when that's gonna happen, and then have some level of consideration and discussion, kind of long-term, to see if there's an option to tie in at that point. Can do that.
Even on the west side, you know, if there would be some type of consideration there. Because that would just kind of free up a lot of that traffic that we're probably having problems with.
Right.
Are there any additional questions either on the elementary school or the middle school?
For both sites, is there enough land to do the geothermal concept we did at the intermediate school?
Yeah, we're tracking geothermal for both projects, and we feel there's sufficient site in both instances where we can do that.
Are you looking at putting the geothermal under the football field?
In this particular option.
Yeah. So one of the things that led up to this discussion tonight was, as we started planning forward, it was kind of the timing pieces. First of all, looking at the heritage piece, when do we need to start design in order to get it online by 2024? And then that precipitated a conversation as far as what's the timing then of when the middle school could come. So that really was like, is it literally 2025 or 2026? I mean, as you can see, because of where you are with the situation with the current heritage site, that kind of dictates what that design looks like and when you start the construction. So this is really just a conceptual piece to kind of just to put into your mind as we move forward here. And as we move through the summer, we'll continue to vet some of these things out. When we get to that second meeting in June, we'll have some of the costing differentials here. I think you can see kind of how it lays out in block form on here and some of the pros and cons to that. But there'll also be a piece that we've asked Jay to take a look at is there a costing differential between either one of those options? Then you can kind of see the whole picture as we start to narrow those down.
When you look at that, how many parking stalls do you have in there? Just kind of a rough guess. You're building a building with 1,000 students, approximately 50 teachers.
I think this one here, trying to remember, because I did count these, I even had the numbers very small little dots on there. I wanted to say it was in the 150 to 175 range, and then the other one was in the 175 to 200 range.
Waunakee is currently in the process of updating their parking lot counts requirements, but also maximums.
Yeah.
So we were looking at that, we were laying this out. But, I mean, until we really get a civil engineer on board, they really do the full parking lot layout, so we're sort of, a reasonable estimate.
These are always close, but not accurate like this.
So if you do this building, where's your geothermal?
Under the playground area, and we may need to disrupt the track and rebuild that portion.
Do you only do the horizontal, or do you do vertical? Vertical. So you would have to be that far out away from the building?
Yeah, I mean, it can be relatively close to the building, it's not right up against it.
You're right.
But, I think it's gonna take, more area for this size of building. It's gonna be larger field than what's in the intermediate school.
And as we're moving through this process, we bring on somebody that's gonna do connectivity testing out there. We don't have that for this site. We're basing intermediate site off of when we did the intermediate school, but we don't actually have that data for this. So, all signs point to the fact that we should be able to do it here, but until we don't get that data, we'll have a better sense of just how well it functions, and that can dictate how many hours we need.
In either case, you have the football and the track, totally separate areas. Is that, there's no possibility to combine the two in the same spot?
On this option here,
In either option, I mean, they're just, the track is there, could that be redone in any way that accommodates both of them? I'm guessing the
Do
answer
you
is
mean the
no.
field inside of the track?
Right.
So the track on here is like a 300 meter
Yeah.
track versus the 400 meters. That was a question you were looking at, Chris, I think the other day.
you need a significant footprint to fit a 400-meter track on site. So in this particular option here, you don't have an option to put a 400-meter track on site. In this option here, I think you're pretty limited. We are gonna do a test fit on that. It would probably, I would say most certainly, it would require taking this portion of the building and pushing it to here, because you're probably gonna use pretty much all that space. And that's if we can negotiate with the grades, because you have to slope to it, grade flat. It's much larger than you anticipate. It's a big track. So we are looking at that to see what it would be. We can evaluate that.
And at the middle school level, that's something that's a requirement, and just, to have a full-size,
For competition, it would be. They've been mainly using this for like a practice track at the
Yep.
point, and then practice behind it, and then their competition has been up at Warrior Stadium. So, just for kind of comparison's sakes, guys, when we built the intermediate school, that was 155,000 square feet. And I believe the middle school that you're scoping out right now is plus or minus 190?
No,
Two ten?
238.
Was it two
It's
forty?
going a little bit bigger since we talked.
240.
What's the elementary that you're looking at?
140.
Okay. So it just kind of gives you, so the elementary's a little bit smaller than our current intermediate and the middle school, because you're adding all of those locker rooms and then all of those elective courses, et cetera, and a larger student population. Is that, you said 230, Jay?
238. Yeah.
238. So it just gives you an idea of kind of the size that we're talking about in comparison to what we just built here a few years ago.
Flip to the next one. It says on the bottom here, but this option could be viable for 2026 as well.
Yeah, so if there's something about this one that you really like, you can just build it later. You don't have to build it while school's in session. So that took us through here.
Just another question. Are you guys looking at solar on these buildings? Are there any rebates or anything?
Well,
The assumption is that we're looking at similar to what was done at the intermediate school with some geothermal and rooftop solar.
We haven't got to that level of discussion yet, but certainly what we did at the intermediate school was trying to create as energy efficient a building as possible. And I think that'll be our goal again.
So, I know this is a high level, so if this is not the right question, I apologize, and if it duplicates part of what Jack was asking, I apologize. Amount of parking space, whether it's a 25 opening or 26 opening, do we have far greater slots for parking here than we do at current middle school?
Current middle school, I don't know what the lot capacity is, but I think it's a little larger here.
Yeah, in current middle school, you have, middle school parking right now is partially in that area by the pool.
Right.
And then also on the other side of the building as
Right.
well. I don't know what the parking lot count is at either one, but we can find that out for you, Mark.
No, my concern is for student performances, you're gonna have a bigger school, more kids,
Yeah.
and do we have enough parking lot for those kind of events, or is that gonna
Right.
kind of burden to that be in the neighborhood? And I just,
Correct.
it's something that we don't need to answer tonight, but I think it's something
Right.
we should be thinking about in terms of design.
Some of the other pieces we're looking at, Mark, is when we get to the middle school and looking at some of their performances, we're trying to push those to the PAC at the high school. And I know, like, right now, that we're having conversations about, like, the school musical at the middle school. That's kind of taken over part of, like, the old auditorium at the high school from a size-wise. So we're having the conversations as far as what do we need for, like, performance spaces.
Right.
And we're having the conversation as far as what do we already have and how do we just have to make sure we do a good job managing it and scheduling it versus creating additional new spaces. So that's kind of the dialogue that's going on, we just had this week. But yeah, but I think as far as if you were having like their musical, it would probably be at the high school in the auditorium and trying to move some of those other performances that direction too as possible.
Thank you.
And as Randy said, this is just to kind of show you where we're at. We're going to be bringing you back more information with regards to costs for the June meeting to evaluate these options.
Yeah, I can say a word or two about kind of what's next, and certainly we'll start here, kind of where we've been. This is a graphic that you've seen a number of times. Randy and Steve have presented. This is a planning schedule that we developed back in the fall of 2021. It has remained largely unchanged since then. And things are tracking really nicely according to the planning schedule. We are on schedule, and everything is tracking, as I said, really nicely. We worked through the fall of '21, gathering data. The projections. We use those enrollment projections and other data to inform the option development process. You've seen those options, and now we've tested those options through the survey, community survey process. You saw those data today, and now we're working through kind of finalizing project scope and working through the financial model with Steve and his team. Next slide. So some of the next steps that we need to work through, we'll talk a little bit about what the administrative team with the core team are going to work through over the course of the next couple of months, and we'll talk through as well about what the implications are at the board level as well. But in terms of the administrative team and the core team, we'll be spending our time on program review, budget review in the coming weeks and months. We'll be doing some communications planning as well. And then the end of July, we'll be talking about drafting ballot language for your consideration, of course, both on the facilities side and on the operational side, and then bringing that to you for your consideration in both July and in August. And then the next slide. And then in terms of what's happening at the board level, we've kind of queued up a series of meetings. On the 13th of June, we're talking through a potential reimbursement resolution. We talked through that early design option with respect to heritage in late June. And July, we're talking about identifying scope, identifying that budget, narrowing that scope to a final scope and final budget and financial model. And then as we get into late July, looking at a potential draft resolution or resolutions as we consider both the facilities referendum, potential facilities referendum, and operational referendum as well. And then potentially also take a look at a communications plan as well to support those referenda as well, should the board so choose. And then target as well the August 8th meeting as a potential adoption meeting. We've got a backup meeting the 22nd of August. We're identifying that as a potential backup because the authorization deadline is the 30th of August.
If I can add two things to that, Andy. First of all, the communications plan, when we start to look at communicating with the community, we'll start working on that all the way through the summer. We'll have an FAQ document, we'll have communications that we'll be sending out, things that'll be starting to queue up as far as how we're going to engage with the community. Those formally start being actualized after you pass the resolutions. So then we can kind of move in that piece from then the August timeframe all the way forward. We'll keep the community involved as we keep working through the summer, but as far as the actual formalized kind of communication that we start to send out and going out to meetings, et cetera, will most likely take place after we get those resolutions in place. Second part, and I'm glad Andy put it up here, and I'm not sure that's exactly what you were alluding to, but it reminded me that we'll also do a piece with all the board members as far as what you can and can't do as part of a referendum effort, what you can say, what you can't say, how you have to kind of navigate kind of that world of advocacy versus providing information. And we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like for Steve and I and other administrators as well as the board. So those will be some pieces we'll do in August before we get to that point.
So the question, or one question is this reimbursement resolution for, we're going to commit to spending $800,000, right?
That's the question. If our desire is to hit that 2024 fall opening, then we need to start this summer. And that's exactly it. The projected number is the $800,000 that then we would front that starting off this summer through November. That's generally what we're looking at to get that first phase of that work done. And then as the referendum passes, if it does pass, it's then reimbursed through the referendum.
What happens if it doesn't pass? Where do we get the 800,000 from?
Steve, we have some thoughts on kind of what that would, obviously you have dollars within fund balance, you have things within other available dollars we have. Any thoughts on that, Steve, other than, I'm just thinking off the top of my head here?
Yeah, thanks for asking, Jack, because that's an important question, because whenever a board considers a reimbursement resolution, like the board did back in 2014, you want to know that the investment that you are making is an investment that you would see moving forward, even if it doesn't pass the community the first time. So as an example, back in 2014, when the board was looking at this, we had similar results from a community survey about this time of the year. We had folks from EUA here at about the same time of year talking to the board about working at Prairie Elementary School, the addition, and being able to get going on that as soon as possible late the following spring. The board was committed to that plan of that expansion at Prairie, so that even if it didn't pass in November of 2014, that same plan was going to be presented to the community again. Because that was an investment the board felt was critical for that school, all it really was a timing piece. But where a reimbursement resolution becomes a challenge for a board is if you would later on change your mind on the larger plan itself, and you would invest resources in something that you would later on change your mind that you didn't want to do. So it's an important thing to think about. It's why we wanted to put it out there a few weeks ahead of time. We were not going to ask anybody to have to make any decisions on that. And in the end, we want the board members to be completely comfortable with this concept. If you want us to push it out 2 weeks further and just get a chance to look at the language, understand it better, we're happy to do that. For board members who haven't seen what that looks like before because you weren't here in 2014, I'm happy to meet with you, share that information up front, because we know it is a big decision.
Right.
To Jack's point, we have to front the $800,000. So in order to accomplish that, what I would recommend is that we maintain the course that was recommended by the budget committee a few months ago, which was to seek savings of approximately $1 million in the remainder of this fiscal year. Now, at the time that we were doing that, we were not aware of the ESSER funds that were being allocated towards our district. So we do have additional financial flexibility that we didn't have. But I would recommend to the board that you continue with the course that was laid out by the budget committee, which was designed to free up funds throughout the remainder of this spring. And instead of using those funds towards a potential budget deficit, we would be able to use those funds towards this effort. But Randy also mentioned other sources of funds. A district has fund balance. We have that available to us. There are districts that borrow. You can borrow without going to referendum if you need to. We wouldn't be in the situation to need to, but there are districts who do that. You can borrow up to $1 million if needed by a district. That can be done through a different accounting fund. But I would recommend that we continue with that plan that the budget committee has already put in place, because that puts us into a strong financial situation moving forward. But I think the biggest takeaway from tonight's meeting, obviously besides the community survey results, is the topic of the timeline and how comfortable as board members are you with that concept of being committed to the investment upfront for an elementary school that would be a new elementary school at the intermediate school site, or as a different site to be determined, but at this point you've seen the drawings of the intermediate school, for up to $800,000. So that is a formal process that the attorneys who actually would write the resolutions for the August dates would also write these, so the process would be connected. And if the referendum were to be approved in November, that connects to the financial plan that would likely issue $10 million of debt immediately in December, with the first 800,000 paying us back. The remainder would then be utilized for continued costs for design, as well as any upfront costs to get the project going. But we would issue the $10 million immediately to make sure we would pay ourselves back. But as board members, you want to know that that upfront investment is a plan that you're committed to, that if necessary, goes past one election cycle to another one, and that you believe in that plan and wouldn't want to change course.
And the 800,000, would that just design the first one and the first building, and the second building would be designed at a later time? What does that $800,000 cover?
It gets us through the full schematic design process, which is about the first.
Of one building or two buildings?
For the first building.
Right.
We wouldn't start anything on the middle school until after the election, because that one is not the same
Right.
time critical thing for the 2024.
Yeah, this first phase with the heritage is the place where we would engage our staff as well. That's where you have those visionary teams and you're sitting down and talking about how you deliver instruction, how do you utilize the space. And then these folks are kind of taking that and extrapolating that into really the layout of the school and designing the school. So that's that first phase.
That's the same process that we use when we did the grade school.
It does also include, for the heritage, building, land survey, soil borings, some things beyond what we provide, but that would be needed for.
I guess we've asked the questions.
Yeah, there we go.
Sorry.
All right.
No,
Yep.
we just had-
Any other questions about any of those pieces? This was really kind of a foreshadow of all of our next steps of planning that our core team is starting to think through. And obviously, these will be pieces that'll you'll continue to see over the next several weeks. But any questions or comments, or is there anything you want to make sure we bring back? I mean, you were asking about parking spaces, we asked a little bit about some of the busing. Any other questions that people have? The track?
Let's go track.
Traffic flow.
Impact of middle school opening in '25 on the existing heritage. How does that affect recess? How does that affect
Yeah.
PE? Those sort of things.
Yep.
Will all those things disappear during during almost a full school year of construction?
We've had some conversations with Dan over at Heritage. There need to be some shifting around on the site, to say the least, right? We're gonna, most likely, and we haven't developed or finalized yet, but most likely, the whole back of the site will be consumed for construction. So there most likely wouldn't be access to the track, most likely wouldn't be access to the field. And a portion of that play area and playground would need to be either relocated or taken offline. I could see Dan suggested potentially utilizing some of the parking lot to the south for a hard surface playground, maybe utilizing some of the residual hard surface areas adjacent to the building, both at the upper level by the cafeteria and the north end, or just below it, as some outdoor space, but there's really not much else there. I don't wanna make any promises that we're gonna say,
Yeah.
oh, don't worry, you'll have it. It's gonna take up a decent amount of area.
Right.
Yeah, parking lot and playground will definitely be impacted. There are methods to accommodate one or the other, but it's not the same playground and parking services that you have there.
Yeah, I think the question to think about over the next month is kind of you have to kind of add, what's your value gain by getting in a year earlier? versus your design, things that are positive or could be viewed as negative. You have to kind of weigh those along with the cost. And so I think to be able to see the whole picture, we'll be able to give that to you at that June meeting. But also looking at it on the long haul, this is a school that's gonna, wherever we site it and build it, it's gonna be there for a long time.
Right.
So you have to kind of weigh, is that the right design?
Right.
And is it worth trying to get in earlier to achieve that? Or is that the design you're happy with to move forward with? So it's kind of paralleling all of those pieces, the design of the building, the layout of the site, and the cost. And overlaying that, is it worth, and can we accomplish what we want long-term? And what's the benefit, what's the gain by getting in there earlier or not? We've talked, I mean, Jeff Keenest is here from the middle school. We'd had a conversation just enrollment-wise, so that'll be a piece we'll bring forward. And as we look at those projections for 25 and 26, I mean, our largest middle school enrollment will be next year. And then we take a little bit of a dip, and then we start to go back up. So our projection, if we stay consistent, puts us in that 24, 25, 26 school year at about what we would see as our enrollment next year. Now, that's a projection a few years out, but we know we can accommodate that. So that'll be a piece we'll parallel into this discussion too. So those are kind of the variables.
Sure.
But that's why we wanted to show it to you tonight, to at least get you start to thinking about kind of how those all fit together. And then I just ask that we look at what do we want to have long-term, because that school will be there for a long time.
You know, in the construction industry, everything goes up and up and up and up. You know, you never really take into account recessions or downturns. But, you know, if you sit down and you take a look at where we're at, you know, we've got supply chain issues, which are driving up costs, driving up inflation. Theoretically, those are going to settle out in the next year, couple of years, right? What are you seeing as you're reading your publications beyond it's going to go up, 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 up?
Not much else right now, Jack, to be honest, but, you know, Randy alluded to it. By the end of June, we'll be able to really focus in on what the cost difference is. Just because we're saying opening in 26, we would still be able to get design done in a time where we could go to the marketplace earlier. We don't have to wait as long. So if you looked at 25 option, we would go to the marketplace in October of 2023. And the 2026 option, we can get to the marketplace probably by December of 2023. So you're able to at least get to the market not too far apart. The biggest question is going to be, hey, flooring subcontractor, you're not going to be on the site for 18 months. What is your price today?
Yeah.
And I think, Jay, one of the things that you shared with me, which is a benefit of us getting started on some of this design earlier, is just needing to get in the queue for things like steel. And needing to get to the point where we know exactly what we need so we can be on get that kind of that order in per se, because I know you said it's quite a ways out in the future.
Yeah, steel, precast, a lot of electrical gear and switchboards and stuff, so for the elementary, that's why it's important to get the design moving soon. For the middle school, by starting right after the referendum, it still gives us the opportunity to get in line for those. But it's crazy right now, Jack. I mean, I was telling Steve this morning, 5 years ago, I probably could have told you tonight what the difference between the two would be.
Yeah.
But things have just changed so much.
But if you look at it, though, you know, we're starting to raise interest rates. That's going to cool off the economy, which is going to, you know, but again, you don't know what that $1 trillion construction impact, you know, from the roads and bridges,
Right.
you know, what that's going to do. You know, so when you look at 25 or 26, you know, the economy may cool off in that cycle. And you got your supply chain, you know, under control.
So somewhat along those lines, I mean, we see that with this survey of the community, they're pretty locked up in terms of what we're doing. But isn't the biggest risk what the economy is gonna do in terms of passing that? If the economy is gonna go down, what is the statistics in terms of referendums when we have a economy that's bad? You put it out there and now all of a sudden, not now. Is that is there any information on things like that?
Well, yeah, definitely. There's lots of data that's been tracked over time that, as far as percentage of referendums that passed at different cycles, and, you know, there's actually been pretty good success rate of school projects during recessions, because oftentimes some of the costs have come down, interest rates have come down during recessions, so it's really a number of variables that go together, and we can certainly pull that data for you. And what we're gonna talk a lot about at the second board meeting in June is really the financial plan and how it's critical to have a long-term goal and how we may have to adjust over the next 5 years as we go based on the variables. Because we did put it out there to the community, would you support a plan that has a consistent tax rate over time, and you saw the response. We can't predict the growth in the community 2 years from now for the property values, or 4 years, or 5 years. What we can do is state that we will be consistent over time between the way that we manage an operating referendum and a capital referendum together, and how the board uses refinancing and issuing new debt across a period of time, which could include recessions, to your point. So we do have to be prepared to be flexible, and we can't have a plan that's so locked in that if any variable changes, it would result in us doing something like increasing the tax rate after explaining to the community that this plan would not do that. So we do have to have that flexibility built in, that as an example, if the property value growth in our community isn't what we had estimated, that we would be prepared by perhaps issuing less debt, or perhaps putting some projects off until the economy does recover. So Eric Cass is going to be focusing in on that during our discussion in a couple of weeks. Because that's a critical factor, is being able to respond to a variety of factors, and we can't be locked in over a 5-year period of time. We're going to have to continue to be flexible and do things like the board has recently done, which is invest in paying off debt to save the taxpayers $1.4 million. It's moves like that that set us up in the future for having that type of flexibility.
But I think as you go forward, you know, we've got a lot of money going through because of COVID. Nobody did anything for a year or so. A lot of fluctuation. Everybody wants to get out. And I think you're going to run through that cash, and probably by delaying it to 2026, you're probably going to put yourself in a better position. You get more bang for your buck.
All right.
I think that's all. Anything else, Steve, anything else to add, or team? I think that's all we had this evening.
Thank you very, very much. Great
Thanks, it's very
information.
good.
Yes,
Oh, no worries. Thank you. We've already done the field trip, so do we need to set any future
No, I
meetings?
think we're all set with those.
Okay, so I just need a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Say, Boy
Aye.
Scout, I'd be
Thank
prepared
you
to
very
like
much.
Thanks, everybody.
It worked. It's on camera, on YouTube, documented today.
Always willing.